chicken he can be. No one likes Twitter. Twitter is trash. We all know this. It's not a hot take and it's not exactly brave. No one's going to sit there and like applaud me like, hey, Charlie's really finally saying what everyone else is too afraid to say. No. Everyone knows Twitter is probably the worst social media platform to ever exist. The more you engage with Twitter, the more likely you are to throw yourself into an oncoming train. But just like everyone else, I become a little zombie and check Twitter every now and then just to scroll through and see what's going on in the world and the people around me, what's going on with all of them. Twitter's a lot like my asshole. It's stinky and full of shit, but I can't help but play with it sometimes. And this morning I got up and I checked Twitter, and something just immediately made my day worse for having read it. Twitter is the real-life equivalent of the chapter black tape from Yu Yu Hakusho. This is an obscure, turbo weeb shit reference, but in Yu Yu Hakusho, there's something called the chapter black tape, which is just a collection of all of humanity's most horrifying moments. Just this phase montage of like war crimes and horrible, horrible shit. And when someone watches that tape, they begin to hate humanity and are convinced that they're not worth saving, that humanity doesn't deserve to survive. That's what Twitter is. But instead of like showing you horrifying crimes, it shows you horrifying takes and convinces you that the world is too stupid and humanity's not worth saving because we're too fucking dumb. This is the tweet that really greased my ass first thing this morning that I want to talk about. Hot take, but I feel once you've reached this level of wealth, maybe you should be using said wealth to benefit the impoverished and not use it to recreate a show that is a direct critique of the exact thing being done here, but hey, that's just me. This is in reference to Mr. Beast and his upcoming Squid Game video. This is not a hot take, this is a dumb take. This is what scientists call posting cringe on Maine. This is a stupid fucking statement. Squid Game, the actual show, cost $21.4 million to make. That money could have been used to help the impoverished in the community, but it wasn't. It was used for entertainment. Interesting. It decides to critique society while also participating in it. Very curious. It's critiquing something that it is directly benefiting from. Interesting. Why didn't they point that out in this tweet? The $21 million for Squid Game, the show, is a lot more than the $2 million Mr. Beast is spending. Why didn't they mention that? It's weird that they focused on Mr. Beast, who is well known for helping a lot of people through his videos and the money those videos make. What's interesting is, the Squid Game money and all that that's generated for Netflix will never go to helping people, but Mr. Beast making this Squid Game video and the money that will make will directly go to food banks that Mr. Beast owns and helps people with. So they chose someone who is literally going to be helping people with the money the Squid Game makes, instead of the Squid Game itself, which was 10 times what Mr. Beast spent and will never help anyone in the community. And I'm not saying the Squid Game team has that obligation and they have to use the money in that way. I'm not here to control how they spend their money, but Twitter certainly is. This user seems to think it's Mr. Beast's responsibility to use his wealth in the Squid Game cost to help the community around him, but why isn't that responsibility also shared by the much more expensive actual Squid Game? It's also just a dumb nothing burger of a statement that can be used for literally anything ever. It boils down to Mr. Beast spent a lot of money on this video, which could have been used as a donation. You could say that for movies. Why do we even have movies when the money spent making those movies could have been used for a donation instead? Why do we have music when the millions spent producing those albums could have been used as a donation instead? The user that posted this might be married. Why did you spend $10,000 on a wedding ring when that could have been used as a donation instead? You don't need a $10,000 rock to prove you love someone. Why not just donate that money? It's just something that is silly and can be said for everything. Targeted at one of the only wealthy people in general who are constantly helping the community and people around him. I made a video recently talking about Mr. Beast. I'm not his fucking PR manager, but he's one of the only genuine wealthy people that are constantly doing everything they can to help other people. You only have to scroll 3 tweets on his Twitter to see this massive food drive he just did to help the impoverished and people around him. But I'm going to go ahead and again focus on the stuff he does off camera real quick, because a lot of people critique Mr. Beast saying he's only doing this for attention and views. They can't wrap their head around the idea that maybe he actually just likes to help people, so they just try and attack this made up idea of who he is. He's only doing it for views and attention. I'm again going to focus on his off camera stuff. I got to see that massive food warehouse. And that food warehouse also has a massive refrigeration unit that allows them to do more than just non-perishable canned goods. It allows them to do vegetables and cold products as well, and it's an extremely rare thing to have because it costs so much. But Mr. Beast went the extra mile with his food bank because he wanted it to be able to serve his community in the best possible way. And this is like a full-time job that he has, running that food bank. He also has that Mr. Beast's philanthropy channel. I sound like a fucking advertisement for this guy, but I really suck his dick hard because he is exactly the kind of wealthy person people have been begging for, and he's still getting shit for it. That Mr. Beast philanthropy channel, 100% of the revenue that makes and the brand deals all go into that food bank, which is serving his community. He is doing like millions of pounds worth of food to his community every month, and he is running this every single day, and he is still getting steamrolled by 12-year-olds on Twitter as if he's not doing enough. All of this being done off camera, and no matter what, it's a lose-lose situation on Twitter. If Mr. Beast shows these things, then people attack him for being a fake, he's a fraud, he's only doing it for attention and views, and if he doesn't show these things, well then they don't exist and everyone's lying, he's making it up. No matter what you do on Twitter, it is a lose-lose situation where no one will be pleased. Twitter's a platform that is only there to be negative, bully, and shit on things no matter what, because that's the most engagement. That huge fucking dopamine hit of the extra 5 hearts on your shit just makes that cock rock hard, baby. That's what makes me so mad on Twitter, is that no matter what you do, it's never enough, because Twitter's a platform that is just made to reward shitty takes and dunking on people, even when it's just completely wrong and misguided. People are just there on Twitter to bully each other, and they try and like out-perfect each other. So they use this idea of perfection, like in this take. If I had this millions of dollars, I would obviously be donating it to the impoverished, but I don't, so I'm not responsible to help anyone. It's Mr. Beast's problem, time to dunk on him. Now let me spread these cheeks a little bit further and dive in. The user who posted this awful take has 16,000 tweets on their account. That's a lot. I have like 300 hours total on Twitter scrolling, and I only have 2,500 tweets. So let's just go ahead and be really generous and say they have doubled the amount of time I've spent on Twitter. So they have 600 hours worth of Twitter scrolling. There's so much more you can do to help the community than just donate money. You could have spent that 600 hours volunteering at a shelter, helping out at your local food bank. You know, you could have donated your time to helping your community, but you didn't. You chose to whine and complain on Twitter for 600 hours. Why is it only Mr. Beast's responsibility to help the community? Don't you also have that obligation? You're choosing not to, and I'm very disappointed. You're taking this road, and it's not just this person. I'm singling them out because this is the tweet that really, it tilted me a bit. It had me fucking inting down mid lane. Like, it was actually pretty upsetting to read. Everyone wants a wealthy person who's extremely generous to the community and doing things to help the community. And we have that with Mr. Beast, and he is still getting shit for it. Blows my mind. But anyway, this user is not the only one that thinks this way. They all cast this facade that they are perfect. And if they were only rich, they would say save humanity. But the thing is, they're not doing anything currently to show that. This user who is getting upset at Mr. Beast for not doing enough is also doing nothing, even though there's so much more they can do than just donating money. Like I said, there is so much you can do that isn't just financial to help the community, and they're not doing it. So why the fuck are they gonna get mad at Mr. Beast, who is doing both time and money constantly for the community? He is not just blindly throwing money at charities that do nothing. He is making his own organizations that are extremely efficient at it. Like, what more could you possibly want? He is doing it full time, off camera, because he is genuinely just trying to help people. And he is still getting blasted on Twitter because he spent a lot of money on a Squid Game video, where the money from that Squid Game video will most likely directly go into his philanthropy, which will in turn help a lot of people, and still getting shit for it. Twitter is a platform that just keeps you stupid and makes you dumber every time you log on to it. Everything has to be negative, even when it's like a genuinely positive situation, for no fucking reason other than just some cheap engagement and internet updoots. This was a horrible take, and so many people retweeted it, commented on it like, yes, preach, this is what I've been saying. Just donate the money instead of make a video out of it. Come on. Like, it doesn't make any sense. They could say that for everything. Instead of making movies, why not just donate all the money that the movies would have cost? There's a pretty big brain idea. Why not just do that? Why don't musical artists just donate all of the money their concerts make to charitable organizations instead of spending money on terrible art to put in their home? That's a genuinely good question. The art that they buy is terrible. You might as well just get rid of that money instead of spend it on fucking Damien Hirst pieces. Point is, it's a stupid take. Like, this was a dumb tweet that a lot of people agree with, and I see this kind of thing all the time. And it's especially silly when it targets someone who is actually doing all of the things Twitter wishes people would do. Mr. Beast does everything that Twitter wants other rich people to do, and it's still not good enough for them. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about this because Twitter is and always will be and always has been an absolute dog shit platform. That's about it. So yeah.
Horror shorts, I can't articulate it, but if you've seen them, you know what I mean. They all have that certain vibe. Animal Crossing. Widely recognized as one of the most relaxing and wholesome games out there, the franchise rose from obscurity into viral popularity and has become one of the most iconic and beloved video game series in the world. With its relaxing music, adorable visuals, slice-of-life gameplay, and slow pace, many players use these games as an escape from the hustle and bustle of daily life. Animal Crossing has been around for 20 years, and during that time it's amassed its fair share of history, drama, and fandom stories. From the highs and lows of its many releases to its black market scandals, there's a lot to cover. So grab your vacation juice, grab your froggy chair, and settle in, because today we're diving into the dark world of Animal Crossing to discuss all the drama and history within. Before we get into the video, I just want to really quickly mention that I have merch now. We got shirts, we got hats, we got hoodies, we got more stuff than those things. Head over to crowdmade.com/collection/Izzy's or head to the link in the description to check out the most cursed collection of clothing ever released. Animal Crossing is a big franchise and there's a lot to cover, so let's start with a little history lesson. Developed by Nintendo, Animal Crossing is a video game series spanning over 20 years in multiple consoles and titles. Despite the fact that many think the original launched on the GameCube, we actually have a pretty surprising console to thank for the birth of this series. The Nintendo 64, or more specifically, the complete and total failure that was the Nintendo 64's external disk drive. See, when the N64 first came out in 1996, it was one of the few consoles consoles that still use these big chunky cartridges instead of the more modern and cutting edge discs. To amend this, Nintendo came up with a big dorky ass clunky magnetic disc drive that attached to the bottom of the console, which they dubbed the 64DD. The abject failure of the 64DD is honestly its own discussion, but in short, the add-on was so poorly received that it was never released outside of Japan and was one of Nintendo's biggest failures. Despite this, the 64DD had some pretty revolutionary features which would inspire Nintendo designers Katsuya Eguchi and Hisashi Nogami. The 64DD enabled features like limited internet connectivity, rewritable storage, and most importantly, a real-time clock system, or RTC. Eguchi and Nogami envisioned a game that operated in real time, with each in-game hour being equal to one real-life hour using the 64DD's real-time clock. In a 2003 interview, Eguchi quoted, "It began life as an N64DD project. Then we came up with the concept of a game where you hang out and do stuff with a bunch of people in a single field. Then one by one we started coming up with more ideas, and Animal Forest is really just the collection of all of those different strands." And thus the first ever Animal Crossing was born in 2001, Dobutsu no Mori, or Animal Forest. The game obviously wasn't released for the ill-fated 64DD due to its terrible reception, so Dobutsu no Mori released for the regular Nintendo 64. As we know, without the 64DD add-on, the console had no internal clock system, so Dobutsu no Mori cartridges actually had battery-powered clocks built into them so the game could still operate using an RTC. The game was pretty unprecedented at the time, being one of the first ever life simulator games to hit the market. In the game, the player character moves to a small town inhabited by cute animals where they just kind of live their life. The game focused on relaxing activities like fishing, bug catching, item collection, and interior design. There's also a big emphasis on the social aspect, with hundreds of unique animal villages with bold personalities to befriend. There are goals and quests scattered throughout the game, like paying off the greedy businessman Tom Nook for the house he forced upon you, or gathering items for villages, but there's no time limit for these goals and you never have to complete them. The true point of the game is really just to make your own fun, take it at your own pace, and watch the town and residents grow and change over time. The series is renowned for having an extremely relaxing and comforting atmosphere, and Dobutsu no Mori for the 64 set the tone remarkably well and served as the blueprint for the games to come. On the release of Animal Forest, Katsuya Eguchi wrote, "In the first week we sold about 30,000, but it got good reviews and word of mouth, and we ended up selling 200,000 copies. We actually sold out and retailers wanted to order more, but we were just switching over to GameCube development and we didn't have any N64 media left. We had to produce the cartridges especially because they had real-time clocks built in, so we weren't able to fulfill the demand for the N64 version. So the release wasn't ideal, they couldn't keep up with demand, and the release had coincided with the last dying breaths of the N64. In fact, Animal Forest was one of the very last games released for the N64 before the GameCube came out. Games released late into a console's life when a new console is literally just about to launch tend not to do very well, and so Animal Forest never made it outside of Japan. Despite this kind of middling reception, Nintendo was willing to give the game another shot, and it was ported to the GameCube 8 months later as Dobutsu no Mori Plus. The game had changed many elements such as the interface and villager designs, but had also added features such as the museum, Able Sisters, Tortimer, and more. With the game taking off in Japan, it was decided that it would be given a US release. But there was one tiny problem. Many Americans did not speak Japanese. Now, most people think that translations for games, also known as localizations, are pretty simple. You just run some dialogue through a translator and boom, but it's not as simple as that. You can't just do a Google Translate hack job. Thousands of lines of dialogue had to be manually translated from Japanese to English, a tough task given that many Japanese words and phrases don't exist at all in English and have no English equivalent. Additionally, Animal Forest included many items, festivals, and gameplay elements that reflected Japanese culture and had to be changed for a Western audience. Examples include the Kamakura Hibachi, the cubby hole, multiple signs, and the bell shrine, which became the wishing well. Some items were removed altogether due to their quote Japanocentric nature, including damas, lucky cats, a shogi board, a sushi boat, a bowl of noodles, spa items, paper lanterns, and more. Holidays like 7 Spring Herbs Day, Coming of Age Day, and Bean Throwing Festival were replaced with holidays like Groundhog Day, Founders Day, and the Harvest Festival. Lastly, the game's title was changed from Animal Forest to Animal Crossing, also known as Animal Crossing Population Growing. This localization took 6 months and was Nintendo's largest translation project to date, at least at the time. Nintendo of Japan was so impressed with this localization that they added the American content into the Japanese game and released it as Dobutsu no Mori E+, which sold extremely well. Despite the fact that Animal Crossing didn't have any violence or high-octane thrills, it was surprisingly successful in America and Europe and sold over 2 million copies worldwide. Looking back, it's honestly pretty surprising that it took off at all given how unprecedented and new it all was. There wasn't really anything like it on the market at the time, and it kind of changed the public's perception about what a game could be. You didn't really do anything other than hang around this little town and vibe out with these funny little animals, and yet it went on to receive critical acclaim and worldwide success. On the topic of Animal Crossing's reception, developer Hisashi Nogami wrote, quote, "Right after we released it, we saw some players that really dug the game. The original Japanese advertisement featured a young school-age girl, so we thought that it would appeal to this user base. Once we released it, the mothers of these children were also playing the game, and then the father would also play, and then the entire family would be playing it. We were really happy when we noticed that." With the success of Animal Crossing population growing, it was clear to Nintendo that the population of fans was growing too, so they set out to create the franchise's next installment, and Animal Crossing Wild World was released a few years later in 2005 for the Nintendo DS. To avoid another lengthy and expensive localization debacle, the designers created Wild World with a global audience in mind, designing interfaces, items, and characters that were universally identifiable. Wild World took a lot of inspiration from previous titles, but introduced a few new elements that would become staples in the franchise, such as online connectivity, the slingshot and watering can, increased character customization, the observatory, crossbreeding flowers, and more. The risky move over to the handheld DS system with its limited storage space and hardware limitations had paid off, as the DS went on to become one of Nintendo's most iconic and beloved modern consoles. The combination of Animal Crossing's casual gameplay and the DS's portability meant that players could take their game wherever they wanted and check up on their town throughout the day, and in this way the game and the console were perfectly suited to one another. The franchise had truly begun to hit its stride, and the numbers reflected this, selling over 11 million copies worldwide. However, the stride would come to a halt with the franchise's next release, City Folk, released in 2008 for the Wii. Also, side note, back in 2007 when the game hadn't properly been unveiled, Edge magazine wrote an article claiming that an inside source told them that City Folk was going to be an MMO, like an Animal Crossing MMO, can you imagine? Anyway, up until this point, each entry had built upon the last, adding new features and themes that would continue to evolve and improve the series. In City Folk, all of this evolution kind of just stopped. Many players saw the choice to release the game for the Wii as a huge step back given how well received and beloved the DS was, and the fact that, well, it's the Wii. The game itself ranks pretty low on a lot of fans' lists purely for the fact that it's almost a carbon copy of Wild World on a worse console. The game didn't really add many features, and the ones that it did were, So, grass deterioration, huh? Let me explain. Grass deterioration was a mechanic added to City Folk where the grass that your character walked on would become worn out and patchy over time, eventually just becoming dirt. The mechanic was intended to be a cute way to make dirt paths in the most well-traversed areas of town, eventually forming unique pathways and roads throughout your town. What actually happened was players would go about their game, often running around randomly to catch insects, and over time their town would become completely filled with patchy grass and barren expanses of dirt. This feature was widely hated, and there was no way to turn it off, leading to floods of backlash and even a petition begging Nintendo to patch the feature out. Unfortunately, this never amounted to anything, so players were stuck with their barren, grassless towns. Overall, City Folk wasn't a bad game by any stretch of the imagination, but many players felt that the once innovative series had begun to stagnate or even regress. It was clear to Nintendo that they couldn't just slap a few new features on the box and call it a day. They had to make something really special or risk losing their huge fan base. Enter Animal Crossing New Leaf in 2013, released for the Nintendo 3DS. Yes, New Leaf was the true successor to Wild World, going on to become the fan favorite of the series even today. The game once again found a perfect match with the 3DS system. Thank God they dropped the Wii thing. I'm sorry to the Wii lovers out there for all this slander. New Leaf added a whole host of new features, from the multiplayer Dream Suite to swimming to Tortimer's Island to custom designs and more. This entry also introduced Isabelle, the adorable Shih Tzu secretary who would go on to replace Tom Nook as the unofficial poster child for the series. The biggest change in the game was the fact that you were no longer a humble pleb living in the village, but the mayor. This gave players a lot more control, allowing them to completely customize their town, a feature which was heavily praised by fans and critics alike. I mean, sure, for some reason they didn't remove the grass deterioration, but they acknowledged that it was annoying and slowed the rate that the grass would wear down. It's a start, I guess. But dusty towns aside, New Leaf was the series' biggest entry to date and arguably the most iconic. It was also the last mainline Animal Crossing game to come out before... 'the bad years. The bad years. After New Leaf's release, players would be left in the dark for 7 years with no sign of a new mainline game. During this dark time, Nintendo released a bunch of spin-off games which were really poorly received and worried the fanbase. Most of these games focused around the amiibo gimmick, amiibos being small cards or figurines of classic Nintendo characters that can connect to Nintendo devices and unlock bonus content. After the release of New Leaf, fans were pretty dismayed to find out that Nintendo had been focusing their efforts into the welcome amiibo update instead of a new game, but they remained hopeful that something new was on the horizon. In 2015, Nintendo released the spin-off title Happy Home Designer for the 3DS, which is basically just what it sounds like. You run around and design homes, it's basically just interior decoration, the game. It had extensive customization options and improved on the series' clunky design controls, but the huge amount of content couldn't make up for the lack of challenge or reward. The game received pretty mixed reviews and sold 3 million copies, honestly decent, but a lot lower than AC's previous entries. This was a good step though, maybe this was like a prototype for the game's next customization system and they were getting fans ready for the next big installment. Nope. Instead, they got Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival. Widely considered to be the worst game in the series and one of the worst games for the Wii U, Amiibo Festival was a commercial and critical failure, relentlessly mocked and criticized by fans. The game was kind of doomed from the beginning. Nintendo announced it during one of their directs, and the announcement and opening shots really led players to believe that a mainline AC game was about to be announced, only to be let down seconds later when it was revealed that Amiibo Festival was a party game. It was basically a knockoff Mario Party, but worse in every regard. Generally, party games are filled with mini-games or challenges to keep the competition fun, but Amiibo Festival is basically just rolling a dice and moving forward to collect points. Yes, that's really it, and yes, it was incredibly boring, and if you brought this to a party, you'd be promptly kicked out. Not to mention the game was just a shameless way to sell more amiibos. So Amiibo Festival was a cash grab and a huge flop, and AC fans were becoming more jaded by the day. With 2 average to extremely poor releases and no sign of a new game in sight, many fans began to wonder if Animal Crossing was crossing over to the other side of the game industry. I don't know where I'm going with this. These fears were all but confirmed when 2 years later, in 2017, Nintendo came out with Animal Crossing Pocket Camp, a mobile game with microtransactions aplenty. The game was free to download on the App Store and used many of the same mechanics from the mainline games, just dumbed down a bit. The game was a lot more restrictive and contained paid memberships, microtransactions, and loot box mechanics. Once again, the game received mixed reviews, with some praising it for the wide variety of items and cosmetics, which were far more inventive and aesthetically pleasing than any other AC game, while others criticized it as a cash grab, and I mean, the game has grossed over $150 million, so grab cash they did. It seemed like Nintendo had chosen to turn Animal Crossing into a slightly more soulless but profitable mobile franchise, and veteran players expressed their hopelessness at the future of the franchise. And then it happened. Finally, after 7 years of suffering, fans were rewarded with Animal Crossing New Horizons for the Nintendo Switch. And oh boy, what a perfect storm of a release that was. The overwhelming build-up of 7 years of hype from millions of fans, combined with the fact that the release coincided with the start of the pandemic, meant that the game appealed to the widest possible audience. Everyone was inside with a bunch of free time, and everyone was looking for an escape from reality, and New Horizons was basically the living embodiment of escapism. Set on a relaxing deserted island inhabited with cute characters and calming music, the game was a way for both fans and those completely unfamiliar with the series to relax and pass the time. For the first time in the franchise, the game allowed players to completely customize every aspect of their island, from the terrain to the layout to the decoration, and with enhanced sharing features, it became the perfect social activity for a bunch of stressed out shut-ins. New Horizons would go on to absolutely blow all of the other games out of the water, selling over 31 million copies, more than every other AC game combined. It was a global sensation, even that is putting it lightly. If you were around for this, which let's be real, you probably were considering we were all inside, you know how crazy it got. Everyone and their mum was playing it, like people were buying $500 Switch consoles just to play this one game. Celebrities like T-Pain, Maisie Williams, Guy Fieri, Stephen Fry, and Elijah Wood were all joining in too, showing just how widespread the game had become. Brands and organizations were using the game to advertise and interact with fans as well. For example, KFC's interactive restaurant or the Monterey Bay Aquarium's educational live streams. Even certain political figures got involved, leading to the widely mocked and memed Joe Biden Island, which encouraged players to vote and educate themselves on the Biden-Harris campaign. My point is, New Horizons was insanely popular and essentially made Animal Crossing go mainstream. Not that it was exactly an indie franchise before, but it was the first time that Animal Crossing had been recognized and popularized on such a viral scale. Because of this, fan communities popped up all over the internet and old ones were revitalized with hundreds of thousands of new members, but we'll get to that later. That's not to say the game was perfect. It received its fair share of criticism, especially from veteran players who felt that the gameplay was bland and dumbed down. Villagers had less bombastic personalities, often repeating the same few lines over and over, and players felt that while the game had improved the controls and mechanics tenfold, it lacked the charm and personality of the previous games. In the old games, villagers would straight up harass you, call you an idiot, call you fat and ugly, they could even rob you. You're looking as awful as ever? Who dresses you? Hey, don't take this wrong, but you look kinda poor. Teehee, you have nothing to lose except your lonely loser status. You filthy ogre, I hope you get stung by 1,000 bees. Yeah, the old villagers were straight up ruthless, and players loved it, but all of that charm seemed to kinda be gone from the new games. If the villagers don't spit in my face, rob me, and call me ugly, is it really an Animal Crossing game? The lack of items on launch also disappointed fans, and this was in conjunction with the biggest disappointment of all, Froggy Chair. Let me explain. So in 2019, a year before the game came out, a meme centered around a furniture item called the Froggy Chair from New Leaf became incredibly popular. The point of the meme was basically just that this chair was goofy and wholesome, and it got super big to the point where some people even got tattoos of Froggy Chair. Hell, even I made a video sculpting a Froggy Chair back before my YouTube channel really even became a thing. So Froggy Chair was the internet's biggest new meme, and when New Horizons came out and there was no sign of the amphibian seat, players were extremely disappointed and voiced their annoyance on social media, even creating petitions. Overall, aside from Froggy Chair and bland villagers, many players just felt that the game was half-baked and lacked charm. On the other hand, it did go on to sell like millions and millions of copies and become beloved around the world, so like everything, it's subjective. It's pretty obvious by this point that Animal Crossing is capital P popular and an incredibly influential franchise. Without Animal Crossing, the life simulator genre wouldn't be what it is today, and we wouldn't have games like Stardew Valley, My Time at Portia, or Cozy Grove. Not to say that it was the only life sim. Harvest Moon and The Sims came out around the same time and were equally influential, but Animal Crossing definitely made a huge impact on the life sim genre and the game industry as a whole. Before we get on with the community and some of the bigger dramas within the series, I just want to touch on some little Easter eggs and fun facts and secrets within the game and franchise. These are all super interesting tidbits that I really want to talk about, but aren't big enough to get their own section, so we'll discuss them now. Alright, let's go. Meow and Bao were two villages only available in Japanese Animal Crossing E+, and only if the player had their corresponding GameCube e-reader cards. By the way, e-reader cards were basically just old amiibos for the GBA and GameCube. Anyway, Meow and Bao were a cat and dog respectively, with LCD screens for faces. They're actually based on two obscure Japanese devices that supposedly translate what your pets are saying, the Meowlingual and the Baolingual, and you can clearly see the resemblance. The free-spirited dog musician, KK Slider, is actually based on Animal Crossing's composer Kazumi Totaka. There's even a secret song in the game composed by Totaka called KK Song or Totaka's Song. In December of 2008, Nintendo released 14 copies of Wild World to the press to demonstrate the data transfer features between Wild World and City Folk. Upon starting up the game and playing through, they discovered that one of the village's catchphrases contained the N-word. No, I'm not kidding. The villager Barbara's usual catchphrase, darling, had been changed to a slur, and her greeting was changed to love you long time, which is a racist quote used to demean Asian women. Naturally, the press was shocked, and the 14 copies were quickly recalled, with Nintendo blaming the game's Wi-Fi features for the incident. Yikes. It turns out that the Able sisters, the trio of Taylor hedgehogs who run the clothes shop, have a pretty sad backstory. The Able sisters store was originally run by their parents who passed away in a tragic accident and handed it down to the eldest sister, Sable. Shortly after their parents' death, Sable and the middle sister, Label, got into an argument and Label left for the big city to become a fashion designer. This left Sable alone, having to run the shop and raise her younger sister all by herself. In Wild World, Sable will get depressed during the month of January, possibly linking back to her parents' death, and throughout the series she'll be cold and standoffish until the player slowly befriends her. It's honestly a pretty sad story about a family driven apart by the loss of their parents, and the ending is pretty bittersweet. In New Leaf, Label has moved back home and seems to be mending things with her sister, and in Happy Home Designer, Sable confides that she's grateful that Label is back but is terrified that Mabel will move away like she did. In New Horizons, Label is no longer working in the store and instead traveling the world learning about fashion, so in a weird way Sable's fears of abandonment were confirmed when her sister moved away again. In the GameCube titles, while crossing over to the island on Cap'n's boat, players have between a 1 and 4% chance of seeing the silhouette of a giant whale beneath the boat. The whale isn't catchable since you can't catch fish on Cap'n's boat, but if you use cheats to glitch it into the river and catch it, the player will pull up an Arapaima with a glitch description text. Believe it or not, the first ever Animal Crossing Let's Play and one of the first Let's Plays in history was created by Christine Weston Chandler, also known as CWC. The infamous creator of Sonichu recorded a 4-hour documentary video where she played footage of Animal Crossing while talking over it.
So anyway, stepping out is my character, Sonichu. He's wearing the clothes with the character on it. Like I said, you might remember his face. There's his actual face. You remember the rest of his body, you see the whole picture. And before we get to the daily routines, I'm gonna take you on a tour of my house, as well as as well as the daily routines. We'll take a tour of the town, but first the house. You see this logo on here? That is the logo to my website on the internet. If you would like to visit it, here's the address. I'm gonna leave it up for a few seconds.
Despite the documentary label, the video has all the hallmarks of a Let's Play, and it's been suggested that this may in fact be the first Let's Play ever created. This video was even featured in an official issue of Nintendo Power in a small section titled Sonichu's CWCville documentary. Trading has always been a really important part of the series, but the GameCube actually didn't have internet functionality. Instead, when players wanted to trade, the game would give you a code which you would then give to your friend, which they would input to receive the item. It's believed that these passcodes were actually just the item's reference number within the game.